So this slide is just to tell you, in a very dense populated area, and the government have to intervene to make the water price more expensive. For example, in China, in this coastal city with beautiful beaches, a family that use more than 8,000 liters, which is 2,000 gallons per month, water will pay 4 times more than the family that conserves water. So in China, in a lot of countries, they encourage people to save water. It's like less you use, it's cheaper price, and I think that is very effective. And of course, here in the United States, EPA encourages people to consume those appliances that save energy, and especially no, not especially. For example, in my house, we purchased this washer and dryer. It has that star label on it, and it is very water efficient. And it weigh how much your clothes is, and calculate how much water you use, and it saves time and save energy and save money. It's like a win-win situation. Domestic use of water. Last thing to mention is the leaking water problem. This is a lot of people do not pay attention to this. Even sometimes I myself didn't realize leaking, how much we can lose. Even in the developed world, losses may be as high as 20%. And the poor countries may lose over 50% of water due to the leaks. So if your house, your apartment have the leaking water problem, let the maintenance fix ASAP. I go to YMCA to exercise. If I see in the locker room a faucet is not working, the water keep running, I definitely tell the management. And you can imagine when the water pipes burst and it's not being fixed in a few days or in a week, how much water we lose. And I want to give you an overview in this slide how countries, different regions of the world, use their water. If you look at the last bar here, in Asia, majority is agriculture, and about 10 to 15% is industrial. This is old slide, I would say several years ago. Nowadays, I think the industrial use of water in Asia probably increased like to 20% because it's still developing and not finishing their demographic transition yet. And if we look at those developed countries, North America, Europe, they certainly use a lot of water for industrial uses and less in agriculture. So in North America, groundwater accounts for about 37% of the water used in agriculture, and the surface water accounts for about 63%. So mainly for agriculture, we use rivers and the lakes, right? We use the surface water and the 40% from the groundwater. Irrigation is a major consumptive use of water in most parts of the world. It accounts for about 80% of all water consumed in North America. So for irrigation, it needs a lot of water. It's just different type of irrigation. Sometimes people just dig tunnels to lead the water from the river and the lakes to the crops. Sometimes they're doing spring techniques here. And irrigated with recycled water. Wow, that is cool. But pay attention to the quality of your recycling water. And most of the recycled water has some content of salt. And when the water evaporates, if you do not solve the salt problem, it called salinization of the soil and kill the soil. So think about what kind of recycled water you use for the irrigation purpose here. And for the industrial use of water, as I just showed you in the slide, the developed countries use more water than the developing countries. And I also want to mention, because this causes contamination also, a very unique form of contamination called thermal contamination. 90% of the water used by industrial is for cooling and is returned to the source. And very little is actually consumed. And most processes involve heat exchange. And water is also used to dissipate it and transport waste, resulting in stream and lake degradation. So now think twice here. The 90% of the water used by industry is for cooling. And remember the nuclear power plants we mentioned, right? And the cooling by the water is vital for the functioning of those power plants. And very little is actually consumed, which means we can recycle those water. And because those water are hot water cause thermal pollution, we probably want to take the heat out of water before we recycle or discharge back to their sources. So the industrial water also sometimes contain a lot of chemicals, right? So the 1972 law, this Clean Water Act, seeks to protect U.S. waters from pollution. It enforced the industrial by implementing two concepts. One is setting water quality standards for surface water. You cannot just dump whatever water into the environment. And the second is limiting effluent discharges into the water because of the reasons I mentioned and will mention again. So that's kind of wrap up all the use of water. Now we move into the water pollution. So there's a few concepts I want to mention here. One is dissolved organic matter. That is significant water contamination. Because it decays in the water, it sucked up the oxygen. So on the right side, I mentioned again, this BOD is the amount of oxygen required to decay a certain amount of organic matter. So if you deprive those oxygen by dumping too much nutrients in the water, it suffocates all forms of lives. I have a slide here to show you. It's very interesting around these industrial sites. If you look at the water close to this side, because the water flows this way. Okay, if the water flow that way, that's a completely different story because the water flows this way. So close by this upstream area is still okay, 8 ppm oxygen in the water. And this is the heaviest contaminated area. There's no oxygen at all. So there's no life in this area. It's a dead zone we mentioned before. And when it's flowing up, the oxygen gradually gets recharged, and from some distance to this side is almost restored back to the original concentration of the oxygen. And I will give you a case study because of the oxygen deprived. It's called the dead zone of Gulf Mexico, and you can see how bad the contamination is. So I want to mention eutrophication here. This aquatic contamination is due to this overload of nutrient. This is a picture of Potomac River in Virginia, close to the discharging site of the industrial site. And you can see it's an overblooming of the algae and aquatic plants. And when they grow, they cover the surface, right? And they suck up the oxygen, and whatever living in the water, anything else cannot live because of lack of oxygen. So a point source, here concepts again. So the point source is the source of pollution readily located, identified. Sometimes we know where they come from, and sometimes we don't. We don't. The non-point sources are more difficult to identify and control. So what can we do to prevent pollution as individuals? We use less toxic alternatives